So one of my concerns about welding is penetration. And this little tab, although it's broken right here, the corresponding one on the other side just came off because the weld from the frame manufacturer, who isn't Harley Davidson, this aftermarket frame, the weld failed. And the reason why is because of a lack of penetration. The base metal here was not melted enough for the bracket to become one with it. It was essentially not glued on. Think of a hot glue gun, but for metal, which is not what you want when welding. When welding, you want the penetration to be good. You actually want to melt the base metal and the bracket enough for them to become one. The actual booger snot isn't what matters, especially for structural repair, which is what we're really needing. So I'm going to see if I can bend this bracket off and break it off just like that one broke off. And the reason why this one broke off is just from the sloshing of the gas back and forth in the gas tank caused it to break. So I should be able to break it off. And there you have it, a weak weld on this bracket. And there's a tiny bit of the bracket left. It's that much thickness that I broke, but maybe not. Maybe it's the weld that just did not penetrate into it far enough. And the thing is, if I weld up this old frame, and it's only welded up good enough for that, it's just going to crack again, no point. Let's take a look at that crack. So this is the crack here, and I've wire brushed it a bit so you can see it better. But it wraps around the entire gosh dang thing. And the reason why it cracked here instead of lower is because of this big brace here. But if not for that big brace, it probably would have cracked lower. Now, what can we do here? Well, you can't just weld and melt the two ends of the tube back together. Even if the weld was stronger, this whole part of the frame is suspect. It's weakened now. Because it didn't just break because of the stress in that one spot, it broke because of the stress all over. There's two things you can do. There's plugging and sleeving. Plugging means that you cut this bit off and you have a solid or a smaller tube that goes inside and you weld that in, and then you weld a piece over to hide it. And the advantage there is you don't know it's ever been repaired. Sleeved, which is what I might do, is you take a pipe that's bigger and put it over and then weld it in place, stretching the stress over this entire area. And the way you do that is Rosetta welds or plug welds. You drill holes into it and then you weld onto the base metal through it, and you have several places. This is a bit of a complicated place to do that because the chain runs right here and I have to figure out exactly how much clearance I have between the chain guard and this pipe here, because I would like to run a chain guard, and although I could not run a chain guard, it just makes this thing much more dangerous. The thing is, I don't want to weld a piece on here and it just be hot glue gunned on. I want to weld a piece on here and it be one. I want it to be stronger than what's there already, so that if it breaks again, it doesn't break right in the same place, it'll break somewhere else. Well, let's take a look at some of the other welds on this frame. And they're not the best, which is why I'm even considering welding it up myself. But take right here, for example, porosity, bit of gap here. Over here there's a big gap between the two pieces of metal, and all the weld between is filler. And then here, for example, this is where the tube stopped, this is where the tube started, and all this is just melted in there. Even places like this, you got a weld on this side, a weld on this side, and nothing in between. So if this works well enough, then why can't my welds, even though I don't know how to weld, work just as well? They could. Here's a good example of a place where they didn't fill in. If I'm wanting to practice to weld, I could add material here. We use a wire brush to take all the paint, add material, make that a stronger joint. Here they did a really good job. You can't really tell where it is because they raised it up and ground it down. But how are the other welds on this thing? Am I going to weld it up and then it cracks somewhere else? At the very least, maybe it's a good way to learn. But I'm still doing research on a welder, and what I've found out so far is that if I buy a cheap welder that doesn't have power, then I'm just going to hot snot glue it on there and not actually weld. So I'm just wasting my money if I purchase a really dinky little welder. I've got to at least get a mid-grade welder to have the power enough to melt the metal.